All right, folks, we are live with another episode of Meet Music Knoxville. It is the show where I, your host, Nick Horner, comes in totally unprepared to chat with some great folks that I've never met in Knoxville, and that's half the fun of it, is, you find out some new things about people, you find out some new things about the scene, and it always ends up being a good time, and sometimes a really weird time. And that's what we're all about here at Real Knoxville Music. Before we kick off, we need to say a special thank you to Raven Records and Rarities, as well as Hutch and Howard Realty of Keller Williams. Folks, y'all are wonderful. Thank you for supporting so much great community work here at Real Knoxville Music. It really could not happen without you. And now we're very excited to be meeting up in the Sunsphere. We have a brand new office that is bare bones. You're getting that classic small room, reverby sound right now, but it's endearing. It's real. It's real life. We're doing the real shit here, and we have a spectacular view right now of the river and the stadium and the park, and the lovely folks that live in downtown Knoxville. It's kind of creepy. If you look hard enough, you never know what you're going to find. Anyway, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I'm really excited. We have Ryan Clackner here. Did I fuck that up? Ryan Clackner, right?
That's right.
There we go. I have failed on the first try with my guests before.
It's an unusual name.
Yeah. Well, it's not that unusual. But it's like in that there's a lot of space for it to, fall flat on its face. Ryan, were you... I'm trying to think of how we found each other. Max Miller.
Yep.
Yeah, you played on, I think, one of Carteret's Honky Tonk.
I did.
Yeah.
It was probably back in April or end of March, maybe.
Yeah. And, Max is like, this guy is awesome and seems like he's a real weirdo in all the best ways. Mm-hmm. And y'all should be in touch. And so that's what we did. And finally... when it didn't happen in person for a while, I was like, well, let's just get this guy in the show. Make an event of it. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. And we had the opportunity to chat just a little bit downstairs, and you revealed, of all places, you're from New Jersey.
Yeah, that's where I grew up.
Yeah, what part of Jersey?
North, a place called Parsippany.
Yeah.
Right on 80.
Mm-hmm. I'm from Pennsylvania originally. Mm-hmm. So, and funny enough, as we were shit-talking Brooklyn... I also lived in Brooklyn for 8 years.
Yeah.
So and I believe your assessments, there was a lot of truth in your assessments of that. So
one of the funny things about that was everybody back in college gave me an endless amount of crap for just getting head over heels with country music, and I was like, it's sort of, it's one of those funny things about jazz musicians and modern classical people and whatever, the progressive elite or whatever that suffice to say, they did not believe me when I predicted that they would be playing country music. and about 10 years later, I kept getting all these texts from people that I had went to school with, like, oh, hey, look, man, I'm playing steel with so-and-so. And I was like, dude, you didn't know what a steel was. Like, I remember you damn people.
So, okay, all right. Well, let's dig into this a little bit, because you said you went to William Patterson for jazz.
I did, yeah.
If you don't know, a very renowned program. So that ought to tell you something about just the caliber of musicianship here. At least at that point of getting into it. Now, that's to say, there are plenty of people who can play jazz and, in my opinion, are not phenomenal musicians, but it's clear that you have a lot of different interests and you have a lot of deep musical love in a lot of... Because I had no clue about country. I didn't realize that was such a thing for you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you grow up with country music? Or
no, it was purely antagonistic love for country music that... it's funny, I hadn't thought about this in so long, but I had this old housemate that we were buddies, but we were really competitive with each other as as far as
both guitars.
Yeah. He lived upstairs, I was downstairs, and I think we were day drinking or something one day, probably like I want to say in between junior and senior year, and he was like, "Hey, let's go, drive around out in the country," and we did. And at some point, he just put on, he was like playing Led Zeppelin all day and whatever and stuff like that, and then he put on Johnny Cash, and it was like getting hit by some kind of strange lightning bolt that I didn't know was possible. And after having So it's context matters here. So I had spent like the last, at that point in my life, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade, first 3 years of college. I mean, you're 8 years or whatever of practicing 8 or 10 hours a day, learning the language of jazz, which is extremely involved.
Yeah, and their program's very bebop intensive, right? It's like sort of classic jazz.
It was classic jazz, but we spent a lot of time on 60s stuff, and I had a lot of friends who were like extremely talented and advanced and like freakishly so, who they had like imbibed and perfected the 1960s kind of stuff before like even necessarily starting college, which is like in terms of understanding music theory and whatnot is freakish and incredible. But even myself, like I had started to kind of I had basically assimilated like most of that 1960s style, whether it be Coltrane bands
or shorter or
Davis's, that kind of like understanding and being able to easily replicate all of that music. Probably by sophomore year, so at that point then you're like, well, what do you do with jazz? And so everybody went, and then some of the people went into the free jazz kind of place, and then different like Art Ensemble of Chicago stuff, and then some people were like more obsessed with, at that time, people like Brad Meldau and Kurt Rosenwinkel and these like, heavy New York guys, Mark Turner and people like that. And I found country music. So because I was really obsessed with people like Jason Moran, who came out of this thing called the M-Bass Collective, which was started by, I'm remembering and replicating this information correctly, it was Greg Osby, Steve Coleman, and I was obsessed with those guys, and I just thought that was like the coolest thing that ever happened. But I also felt like they already did it. It was done. Like they already had a claim on it. They'd had a claim on it forever, and it was fairly obvious they didn't need my involvement in it. And I needed to find, something I was going to do for myself, And just with the kind of sideways nature of my personality or whatever, I latched on to country music, and I just felt like, well, I had already done kind of what I wanted to do with jazz per se, and I felt like I was at a loss, like after school was done. I didn't want to go to Brooklyn. I didn't want to live in a shoebox apartment, and I just didn't believe in that music enough anymore to. I hadn't found my place in it, and I didn't believe in it as a collective enough to care enough to stay and try. And I just wanted to go somewhere different. So I had a lot of classmates, friends that were from Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, or whatever, and I had started to love country music. So I just said, "Screw it, I'm gonna move to Tennessee."
Well, do you mind if I just dip out of that for a second? Because I mean, how long was heavy? Because
it was sort of crazy, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I've been here for like almost 20 years at this point, but...
Oh, really? Obviously, yeah. The math on that. But like, you present as a heavy metal dude.
Yeah.
When did that work its way into the equation? And
well, I grew up listening to mainstream metal bands, all the same ones kids at that time would have been listening to, like Pantera and Metallica and Slayer and, all that kind of crap. And this is what I grew up with. I loved it, and I my 8th grade first guitar teacher said you should join jazz band because you're quickly, you know, gaining proficiency, and you like obviously have a little talent, and like you should, you know, you could sit here and like learn every Metallica song in the world, and that's fine if you want to, but you know, it might serve you more to try to learn how to play jazz. And I was, you know, listening wise, I was familiar with it. My father is a jazz fan, so it was in the house, you know.
Yeah. What kind of stuff was in the house?
Well, like Count Basie and Stan Getz, and he liked those recordings of Joao and Astrid Gilberto, like Brazilian stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, Miles.
Yeah.
Coltrane.
Yeah, it seems like
the
classic.
Pre-1962 or so Coltrane.
Yeah.
You know, the easily digestible pre-Avant era Coltrane stuff. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And so when you got to, because you get to college and it's like, is heavy metal still a part of that vocabulary that you're using?
No, I had tried to completely
disassociate from it.
Yeah, completely, because I just wanted to be a grown up or something.
Do you mind if I ask? Was your appearance? Did you do the jazz thing? Do you show up with tight? I don't know what it was then. Was it tight jeans and? You know?
No, I was a kid. I didn't know any different. I think I just probably wore what everybody else wore.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. When did heavy metal make a resurgence in your life and identity?
When I had been in Nashville for a while, and I just was like, man, this is the worst place I've ever set foot in my entire life. But I was stuck, you know, because I still like had this, you know, this sort of long-term hangover of what it means to be, for example, a professional musician, a career musician. You know, what would somebody that like had really truly learned how to play and like could really actually play anything, you know, like what was I supposed to do in Nashville? It's like, well, I knew I had like a lot musically, creatively, artistically to offer, but it's not there, you know, like there's just no people, there's no reciprocity anywhere with anybody, because they're business people. They're business people in bedazzled bridges, basically. You know. Did you
find community under this? I mean, I've heard that they're. Oh, okay. That's one thing I had thought.
No, because so it's like really important to kind of make sense of this, to state clearly that one drunken night in college, or maybe right after I had been having parties and people at the house, and this was still when I was up north, and I was and am kind of a technological troglodyte, and everybody had already started using iPods, and I just refused. You know, like I got a CD 10 years after CD players eclipsed cassettes and so on and so forth. So in any case, I was having these parties at my house all the time, and I got sick of changing CDs, like, because I would hear, you know, I want to listen to 2 or 3 Waylon songs, and then we have another shot or two, and like I want to go listen to something heavy, and then back and forth, you know, and like, you know, and I loved to like pull up Charles Ives and like play the 4th of July or something, and like really weird people out, you know, and just go all over the place. And I was walking around and I was thinking about Jason Moran, and I said, well, if he's doing it with jazz and hip hop and blues and whatever, it's like, well, I'm gonna do it too. You know, fuck him. And he's not gonna be the only one doing stuff like that. And you know, and I just said, okay, well, I'll find some way to mix like country and metal and jazz, and I say all of them with, you know, in quotes, because it's really, this whole thing has been very long term. I mean, man, we're talking about a long time ago. That was, I was probably 21. I'm about to be 39. So walking to the bar, the first time it popped into my head that I could actually hear it. Something that was like back then it was really more like guitar solos. Like I hadn't quite made up my mind and just like moved to Nashville and try to come up with a new kind of music or something completely insane. That was like, a few drinks later or whatever. I also haven't drank in like 13 years to be clear, but back then that, big part of my life. But I walked to the bar and it popped into my head, and so I just, it ruined all my gigs and everything, because after that it was like the only thing I could do. I was like trying to figure out how you could take this kind of, modern jazz sound that's on par with people like Jason or Osby or whatever, which at this point I don't really care about whether it's on that scale or not, because I found out what's actually like more important to me personally, rather than what would impress the people of the day or whatever. But
what are the things that are important to you? Does it break down to any elements of like quote unquote theory, or is it just what are the things?
I use theory, of course, in all these different bands, but it's really more to create a vibe. Like, like I think about what. So one of the things that how do I say this? Every scale, every mode, which is sort of a scale, has its own mood. It has a character. Mm-hmm. Every time you change that, it has a character. Every time you go from one key to another, it creates a certain character. Like if you modulate from the key of A to the key of D, it has a certain character. If you move from the key of A to the key of C sharp, then that has a whole other category. It's in another category, but it's also a very powerful kind of transition. So I keep those things in mind when I'm trying to create something. But when really this whole thing came about by saying like there's a malleable set of genetics that each of these genres contain, similarly to how each mood of a scale or mode presents itself very clearly, right? So like jazz has certain hallmarks, different kinds of metal have certain hallmarks, different kinds of country music have different hallmarks, and under those pillar genres, if you want to call them that, like in country there's old time music, there's bluegrass music, there's mountain music, there's Cajun music, there's all different kinds of folk music, all of which largely come from the South, which is basically why I moved here. It wasn't so much to be like some kind of Nashville idiot, playing crappy gigs for 4 hours because I think it's going to get me a record label or deal or something like that. It was really just to soak it up, and not be a Brooklyn country musician. But the idea is basically just to sort of like how you can isolate in any given scale, you can isolate basically what creates the mood, and the rest is sort of extraneous. That's how I basically just view genres as a whole.
Well, it's sort of like I think about Bill Frisell, who's like, I feel like his whole compositional style is that. It's like just really hyper focusing on, sometimes certain it's 3 or 4 notes, and it's just creating a world around it.
All right.
Now, do you think, and I'm curious about this, when you are performing live, so this is a very analytical approach to sort of talking about this stuff, in a way. Like, do you feel that your live experience is largely rooted in the analytical approach, or is it something else?
I hope not. I don't want anything to do with it. I don't ever talk about it.
It's building that template for it, and basis for you to be and exist over the top of and live through.
Yeah, I mean,
musically.
This is more like the skeleton of the thing.
Yeah.
And
well, it's like you see Kurt Rosenwinkel play, and you're like, don't get me wrong, like, dude is, I'm like, it has an immediacy to it, but it does kind of feel like I'm in a math class, You know,
I
probably more so.
Personally, I don't feel like that about Kurt, but there's plenty of them that I do.
Actually, I didn't think Kurt. I didn't say who's the guy I'm thinking of? Miles Okazaki.
Sure.
I always let.
Well, yeah. He's like, I guess he would be like second or third generation coming out of that. You know, again, M-bass kind of thing, which, you know, like anybody, and I'm not comparing my music or talent or whatever to those guys. They're like basically on a whole other level than 99.9% of the planet.
Oh yeah.
Anyone that is trying to kind of like from scratch create a system runs into those problems, right? Because like you want to build a system that's closed enough that you can stamp your identity with it, but like you run into the problem of cannibalizing. And part of the problem that, you know, people that want to create a system, whether it's in music or anything else, painters have the same problem, poets, everybody, or business people, like, you know, this is not unique to me in any way. You get caught up, it's easy to get caught up in the dry side of it, what I call the dry side, the you know, analytical, if you want to call it that, which, like, for me, an analytic mind and music are like anathema. They should not be in the same room. Like, if you want to teach somebody how to play, and you want to teach them how to run chord changes, or teach them how 4/4 time and 5/4 time and all the rest of that shit works, then so be it. But that has, like, practically nothing to do with how people out in the world will perceive what you're playing. And this is a big part of my stance, as opposed to a lot of people who deal with things that are of a fully or partially avant-garde nature. It's kind of always been my main criticism, is it's like
gets lost in its own language.
It does, and there's a tendency, I feel like, and has been for a long time with artists, to be, you know, I don't want to be like a huge turd and blacklist myself, but it's like self-indulgent. Yeah. And I'm guilty of it, and a lot of people are too, but I think what sets apart great art from things that could be great, things that come close, things that could go further, is, you know, a willingness on the part of the artist, not necessarily to try to sell, but to
connect,
infuse, not even necessarily to connect per se, because they might not be able to. A lot of artists are completely shattered, deranged individuals. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think people like Van Gogh were trying to connect. I don't think they gave, you know, one dog shit about it. They just were trying to, and this is my point, trying to put as much of their soul into it as possible. And that connects. That doesn't need a salesman. That doesn't need a middleman. That's practically, that's like verging on a covenant, you know?
Yeah.
An unspoken, unstated covenant where the artist just says, this is it.
Yeah.
You can't be more, I can't be more me than this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally. Saying? I know exactly what you're saying.
So then it in a lot of ways liberates the would-be consumer to, you know, take it or leave it. You don't have to sell. It can just be real. It's just real on its own. It stands on its own. Yeah. And so it's like it takes a certain amount of guts at that point after creating this, you know, system to like throw that shit out the window and just get on with the business of actually making music. Yeah. Which would be finding some way to like create something that's intellectually or analytically satisfying, right? So you don't feel like you're just like writing this dumb shit. But then also putting so that it's not only a skeleton, but it also has the flesh and the blood and the soul and the heart and all that, which is like infinitely harder. Yeah. Because anybody could sit in a room and devise some stupid scheme to like do whatever, you know, but like doing it out there in front of people and putting it out in front of people is pretty nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
I did not like it.
Do you feel so? My question on this, because I think that that's a great.
This is what all the old jazz musicians always talked about. This is like, and classical composers too. Anyone that ever really just went all in, you know, has always said. I mean, you know, there's all this like famous stories about Miles Davis paying Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter to not practice, so that they wouldn't think about this kind of shit.
Yeah, I just saw a great quote about him. He's like, "I don't pay you to entertain the audience. I pay you to get up on stage and try something new."
Right.
Yeah, or something to that effect.
Right.
But
that and to do it with a certain amount of, you know, conviction that like implies that. This is real. This is alive. Alive being a good word. Forget live. It's more like alive. That's the word.
Yeah.
You know, to make the human element. I think about that Joseph Campbell quote a lot, where he says people always goof up because they think that they're trying to find meaning for their life, but what they're really trying to find is the sense of being just being alive.
Yeah.
You know,
no, I've never heard that before.
Because people, they sit in these offices and they stare out and they see the world out there and they never realize like they can just go out and be in the world. But they can't, because they can't actually ever just leave their heads either. So even when they go out into the world, they're still
lost in the world that they left. Yeah.
And the idea being that, you know, if you imbue something with enough of yourself, it takes on a life of its own, and for whatever reason it's just a simply observable facet and fact of human nature that we like that.
Yeah.
We just like it. We're just drawn to it. We don't even really like it. It's not a like as much as it is a tendency in human beings to be attracted to anything of a genuinely sublime nature. That's what we want. We want to be reminded of divinity somehow.
Yeah.
We think of ourselves as Christians or atheists or whatever, what have you, it doesn't matter. But the idea is basically that really good music, really good art will be infused. And this is not actually as true nowadays as it used to be. It used to be a given that it would be imbued with as much soul power as you could put into it. And I don't mean that in like a James Brown sense, but I mean like a, you know, your own soul, whatever that is, your spirit.
Now,
but I don't know if people are really actually doing it like that anymore. I don't know if that's like as much a given nowadays. Like even in black metal and death metal and stuff, like with the internet, you have like tons and tons and tons of carbon copies.
Yeah.
Of people, like if I watch them play or listen to the album, it's like, dude, you could just be an accountant. Like you don't have to do this, because if you're not basically on the verge of willing to die, or like overtly willing to die over it, there's no sense in doing it. There really isn't, because because you could be a sound man, you could be a touring guitar player, you could do whatever. Like you don't have to like go this far out just to half-ass it.
Yeah. Well, that brings up a couple things that I immediately think of, and one is a conversation that I've had a lot of times with a lot of people, and it makes me think of this idea of basically, even if you're not working within the popular sphere of music that is affected by technology, quantizing, auto-tune, all of this stuff, we're adjacent to that constantly. You know what I mean? And so it's like that being around for so long. You know, even like at the birth of the synthesizer, it's like the idea that like you can fundamentally get the same pitch every time you hit the same key, you know, like radically changed music. Because all of a sudden it's like we're now it's not subjective. It's, you know, it's like the notion of pitch and these notions of rhythm. Yeah, they're something that it's like we're competing against a grid. We're competing against these definite concepts, and so it's like, that my guess is right. That probably contributes to a lot of that thing that we're dealing with and that lack of soul. Because then also you pit that against, I don't know, technology culture.
Yeah, that lacks the obvious and damning observation about humans that they just aren't really very creative on average.
We think that you're saying that humans are not creative on average.
I don't think so. I don't think most people really actually want to be.
Yeah.
Like it's ever present in practically any human being that exists, but I don't actually think.
So do you think that technology has put the power of creation in the hands of a lot of people who maybe are not the ones that are holding the flame?
It's like the same thing as I say about social media. It's like social media isn't bad. All it did is show how awful most of us are. That's it.
Yeah.
It didn't do any. It didn't social media isn't ruining the world.
Oh yeah.
It's just showing you how shitty you are. Most people, the temper tantrums about politics and all that kind of crap. You know what I mean? Just that alone.
Yeah, there were horrible people along.
Most basic passing observation. If I was an alien that had only looked at social media for 10 seconds, I'd oh yeah, these people. It's the same thing. I don't think it's made musicians any more creative or less creative. I just think more people have access to recording than they ever did.
But also, there's the other thing that happens where the technical skill of learning music is a lot easier than it was. In terms of it used to be.
Depends on how far you want to go with it. I agree with that to some extent. There's nothing that will ever replace human master to apprentice. There's no way. It's a facet of human nature that cannot be eradicated. Just like no matter how much avant-garde shit you pump into your ears or pump out to the airwaves, you will never ever get around a major chord. You're never going to beat C major.
Yeah.
You can't. It's not possible. But that's not because of a soul thing or a human thing. That's practically in biology. It's your ears.
Yeah.
Your ears and how the brain receives the information that's put in through the ears. And the ability to memorize a melody without trying to. And it really only lasts for 4 to 5 seconds. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So you're competing with complete biology when you talk about, disassembling all of Western harmony for the sake of being supposedly free. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's you might be free to sound terrible. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's a very, very it's a tricky thing, and I don't think the internet has changed that one bit. I don't think it's going to. I don't think home studios are going to change that. I just think it's something that people people are just funny. People don't. You think about the Nietzsche quote about people not wanting their illusions removed. It's really more than that. I don't think that the internet is bad. I don't think the technology is bad. If it wasn't this way, there'd be no way in hell I would have been able to do anything, because I've never had any money, because I've been talking about this for the last 18 years with people, and no one ever knew what I was talking about until fairly recently, when I was able to start recording all the time. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I really wasn't ready to talk about it with anybody. I would try to, but it just sounded like a psycho. Just, some guy out there on the mountain, talking about some revelation that he had that no one else could perceive is worthless.
Yeah.
Truly worthless.
Yeah.
And arguable whether I wasted my life on it or not.
Damn.
You know what I mean? Because I could have just been a good career guitar player. I could have just shut up and been a Nashville guy. Or I could have, hoofed it and played jazz adjacent, whatever, in Brooklyn. Or maybe even Manhattan if I, made enough money. Yeah. But
hung out with the right people.
I don't think people can even afford Brooklyn anymore. I think they're all off in Queens and the Bronx now, last I heard, which is wild.
That is true.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, a lot of people just move down to Ditmas Park and South Brooklyn, or they're yeah. And that's the thing I always say about I've always said about Brooklyn is like there's going to be a point where the people who work at the fancy places don't have train lines to get into work, and what happens then?
Yeah,
because that's a real problem.
Yeah.
So
yeah, all these places are changing, man. You know, because I always used to make fun of the 5 Points in East Nashville, and I always called it Little Brooklyn because it was like a lot of the same kind of people who are supposed to be like this, you know, great creative class of people who bring great change to our society and all that. And you know, and I just found like, you know, there's a lot of copycats, like a lot of guys that have cool pants and not very cool ideas.
Yeah,
and I don't like that. Which is why I spend a lot of time alone, you know?
Yeah.
And was willing to do so for a very extended period of time, you know? Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, I started Moonlight a year ago and had released 3 albums, no, 4 prior to that. Starting when I was, 32 probably, 32 or 33. I don't know. Not very long, not really all that long ago, you know? And those albums, those first 3 were with a band called Stumptail Dolly, which I killed off and then resuscitated it as part of one of the releases from last year. But that was really my first like official attempt at trying to do this. So it was like a lot of Nashville-ish country guitar parts, specifically coming out of people like Jerry Reed, and then some dissonant blast beat kind of things. And it's basically the idea of finding ways that make a reasonable amount of sense to just try to unite the two of them. One of the basic conundrum of that band, and every one of them on Moonlight has some kind of like, you know, philosophical conundrum that arose in the conception stage. This one is that I just didn't want it to have minor chords because like that's, you know, it's metal. It's like 101.
Yeah.
Right? Minor and then beyond into different levels of dissonance from there. So I just said, no, I want it to be like really night and day, like really obvious country-ish kind of sounds pitted against like straight up atonal, just like absolute chaos, odd time shit and they just feed each other back and forth, so it has this kind of Jekyll and Hyde thing going on.
Yeah.
You know? And so that also another one of the you know, kind of like overarching big themes was like that I wanted each guitar solo to always be able to reflect the whole, right? So like whether I play one guitar solo like on stage in one of these bands or whatever, like it should always have what some people call the information of the. There was this. Have you ever heard of Tyshawn Sorey?
Yeah, of course.
So he was a classmate of mine. I played guitar in his first band. It was called Oblique, and we were very good friends, and we're still friends. I never see him anymore, but you know, of course, because he's
Tyshawn Sorey,
huge.
Yeah,
you know, and we all knew he would be.
Mm-hmm.
But he always used to say the information. It was like this kind of running joke he had. Because no one else called it information, but it's brilliant. Like if you talk about music and the kind of the metadata, if you will, of a composition, you should call it the information. That's what it is, because you can't really like accurately. You can only write down again the analytical side. You can't actually directly convey the soul side of things, right? That's for what the music itself is supposed to actually conjure up. So anyway, the information present with Stumptail Dolly was supposed to just be that, and then we had a fiddle player at the time, and you know, and I had this guy from Louisville playing drums, and he just he was actually a good jazz drummer, and so he just like latched on to playing the train beats and the blast beats and going back and forth, and he just like would totally nail all the odd times and whatever. But I just couldn't keep the band together. I was dating the fiddle player, and that went all to hell. And
classic.
You know, yeah. And so I thought it was all done, and I started thinking, you know, maybe I'm just fucked, and I just was wasting my time, like my dad said, and whatever. And you know, and it was really hard to be in Nashville and like, you know, drive around and everywhere. It's like, oh, Mr. So-and-so had a #1 hit with his new song about trucks and trains and pizza and bitches and whatever. And, you know, and just like, man, this is just the worst. This is like the worst place on earth. Like I either have to just like totally sell my soul and just give up this like crazy crap that's in my head.
Yeah.
Or just absolutely cut ties from it, you know? And like, even if I'm still here, just be a hermit, which is basically what I did.
When did that happen? When did hermit stage kick in?
It started when I, probably like 7 years ago. And for like 5 years, I worked at this sober living halfway house. And I worked nights for the most part. And so I was just alone. I was basically alone. Like I basically was alone living in the dark for like 5 years.
And if you weren't going to be a heavy metal musician before that...
Yeah, well, I was already listening to a lot of black metal by then, but that's when it just kind of became a, like, deep, like, okay, like, this is like, obviously the one for me, as opposed to, you know, there's other stuff I was listening to, death metal and doom metal bands and all, you know. But black metal specifically, with the, you know, nature obsession, misanthropic tendencies, you know, kind of an obsessive loneliness and a bordering on romantic nature at times, you know. Mm-hmm. I was just like, oh, it's another kind of world of people that are obsessed with philosophies and things that, in a lot of ways, precede and take precedence over the music itself. Like it's designed with that in mind rather than absolute music, if you will, where it's just music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it opened up a whole new thing for me where I could, okay, like this is like super extreme, dissonant, crazy. It has a very specific mood, but it's also like growing, and there's total weirdos all over the place that have very like unique takes on it, and it seems like anything really goes. Like I can work with that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's through that, ironically, like the church burner people.
Yeah.
That, you know, that I was like, okay, well, man, like, you know, bands like, I don't know how you properly say it, but Blut aus Nord, this French band, you know, just like, of course, French people would have a really great take on it. And I always loved French classical music, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Impressionist music and French painters and what, I mean, you know, of course they have things happening.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And this culture that has a mindset for this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So like that kind of in a lot of ways actually helped me tie it all together. Plus, you know, those bands are, you know, Scandinavian bands have been using Scandinavian folk music in metal context forever. And I was like, dude, this is America. We live in the South. Like, hello. This is like, how did you freaking people miss this? You know? But that's the whole thing. It's just like it just kind of all came together, and I just basically used the jazz background and the, you know, classical music background to kind of glue it all together and help give it shape, and definitely with the theoretical side of things, which is it. One thing to be clear that I always wanted to avoid was having a kind of proggy sound. I didn't want it to be overtly prog or jazz or anything. Like people they don't even hear it.
Yeah.
Like when I read the reviews that people write about it, they never talk about it, which is possibly the funniest thing to me, because I feel like I got away with murder in a sense.
Wait, they never talk about what? Sorry.
Jazz, classical, the chord progression,
how
dissonant any of it is. They're just like, yeah, it's this really weird black metal band from Tennessee that has country influences or something. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah.
That's good.
That's it. Yes, you're right.
That's a great compliment.
Exactly, because that means that I was able to get in. I was able to do what I said.
You did that thing that they told you in jazz school, where they were like, if you can play jazz, you can play anything.
You can, but I wanted it to be specifically
true to the elements that you...
To all of it. I wanted it to be understated so that it's not leading with that.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But if you like listen to, like, we just dropped the new Vile Haint album, like, man, you listen to those chord progressions on there and it's like totally alien to anything.
Yeah.
Metal, black metal, whatever. I don't care what kind of metal you're talking about. Like, it's totally drawn from something else altogether. But no, like, literally no one has said anything about it, which is it's just so funny to me.
Yeah. Do you think it's because, like, what would you attribute that to?
I just didn't lead with it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe they're really tone deaf. Or they just don't listen to music that's, like, outside of black metal. So they don't necessarily even have a context. It's like somebody that's talking, you know, Spanglish or something, and it's like, you know, 2/3 of what they're saying maybe or whatever, and then you miss some of it, but you still really like the person, so you just keep talking with them. You know what I mean? It's like possibly just something like that, you know.
Yeah.
I also just think, again, too, that I was able to dump enough soul energy, so to speak, into it that it, you know, like it can just reach even if they don't necessarily have any understanding of what they're hearing, which was the goal.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like that marks, like I always say that when the first Primeval Well album came out, I feel like that's like when I kind of became myself, so to speak. Whether anyone cares, whether anyone ever hears the albums, like, it doesn't matter. Like, for myself, I turned a page, so to speak. You know what I mean? And I'll die knowing that. Like, if I died right now, I would just say, like, I did what I wanted to do when I was 21. You know, when I had finished school and I thought life was over and it was actually not even really starting yet, that was what I wanted to do. Like, when I was 5 years younger than that, I wanted to learn how to play jazz, but by the time I had finished college for that, I just felt like, in a lot of ways, and this is totally insane, it's preposterous, it's completely insane and, like, psychotically arrogant to like have even had that idea in the first place, that I just, like, wanted to have my own kind of music. You know what I mean? Like, it's really kind of absurd to, like, say that. And I didn't really know that. I just, like, knew that people were saying I couldn't, and I was like, okay, cool. All right, I'll show you. I mean, it took, you know, a long time, but I feel like I can say that I came up with a voice, you know, that's uniquely mine, and I can promise you I fucking paid for it too.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Man.
I mean, and that's what people always talked about, you know, you talk about these old jazz guys, and I always remember that Thelonious Monk quote where he said, yeah, just do you, it might take the audience 15 years. And I remember when I was 21 or 22 and I didn't know what 15 years like felt like, because I had only been through that loop once at that age, you know. But like 15 years, I don't know if I would do it again. But I just was strong and stupid enough at the same time to just say, like, I don't care if, like, I just had to say, I don't care if Tyshawn likes this shit, I don't care if Nashville likes this shit, I don't care if the Norwegian black metal crowd likes this, like, I don't care if anyone does, like, I just have to try to figure it out, like, I'm this far in, and I remember, like, reading about, you familiar with philosophical razors?
No.
A razor is, it's hard to explain. I would do a bad job explaining it, but it's like a philosophical statement that basically can't be refuted, and I can't even think of one now. But it's like it's in the category of logic, different philosophical logic, right? And there's one that comes up when you look into stuff like this about not repeating a mistake just because you have dumped, say, 10 years of your life into something. Like, don't, like, keep making, you know, if Bank of America is tanking, don't keep dumping your money into it because you've been doing that
just
for
because
10 years
for 10
already.
years, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, get out. Like, throw your pride out the window and get on with your life.
Yeah.
And so I'd be like scrolling and read stuff like that. And like, oh God, I don't know whether I should keep going or kill if I should kill myself or if this is gonna kill me or what. But
so this is funny, and I'm gonna throw this out there as a concept. Do you ever consider the notion that like the art is not the individual is not the language or the individual pieces or whatever, but it's your life? You know, the idea that it's like if you jump off now, the piece is not finished.
Jump off as in
like
die?
Is it like no? Well, if you die, then the piece is over by nature of the fact that you're dead. But I mean, just like, you know, if you gave up, if you like stopped investing in Bank of America, you were not the lifelong Bank of America.
Well, that's what it was. That was what kept me dangling on the hook the whole time, was just that I knew that just think about early jazz. Like, just think about what those people went through to bring, especially bebop, as basically the first truly American avant-garde, right? Because they had really cut ties with the pop element of jazz, and jazz was king at that time. So for Charlie Parker and Monk and those guys to come out like that, dude, that is radical, like truly radical. And now that's the primary basic language of jazz, and we like tend to take that for granted, like the insane willingness to just alienate everybody.
Yeah.
You know, and so now you have so many artists and people that think of themselves as artists who are just like lockstep with the biggest corporation and governments of America and the world, all trumpeting off the same thing, acting strangely uniform with each other. I'm looking for an individual voice. Like, I don't care about that. Mm-hmm. The group, the collective. I don't think that's where art comes from.
Yeah.
And in terms of a personality style, I would not really at this stage of my life consider myself belligerent, but I have a side that is antagonistic enough to just say, well, they're all going that way. I don't care. I'm going that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just to be contrarian. And that was a big part of like how I wound up with this crap in the first place, but I also felt, you know, like that was immature, and I didn't want to be like that for my whole life. Like, this has to become real. Like, it has to start having like, man, I mean, I was like 30. I turned 28 and started touring with other people, and had already had one band that I put everything into, and had already fallen apart. I toured with a few different people. I toured with this guy, Bob Wayne, is this really cool outlaw country guy, and then I played with another band called Fifth on the Floor, and toured with both of them for a while. Got done with that and tried to start a band, and then again that one fell apart, and I just like couldn't find drummers, especially in Nashville, because everybody just wants to get paid to leave their house, and they don't care about music or art or anything at all. Mm-hmm. And there's another thing with Nashville too, is that the people that are born and raised there, who would be good candidates for like your typical metal band kind of people, they hate country music so much that when I come around talking about this crazy bullshit about, you know, atonal 5/4 parts going into a country thing, they're like, oh no, like they like run away from me.
Wow.
You know, so
yeah.
But I got stuck there because I became dependent on working, and like,
even that's amazing, because it's such a, like, you'd think it was.
You would think there's a lot of things that you would think.
Yeah.
And I found a lot of them. like that were just like very jarring, eye-opening, weird lessons about humanity and that city in particular.
Yeah.
Which I know more about at this point than I do like where I'm actually from. You know, I have no idea what they're doing in Brooklyn anymore. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
But it's been a strange ride. But yes, I do. Sorry to answer your question from 18 minutes ago about the lifelong commitment. That is what it is.
Yeah.
That's because I just said, well, shit, man, I'm this far into it. Like, I'm never gonna have kids. I'm like, I can't barely pay my rent. Like, I'm hungry all the time. And like, this is it. Like, it just has to be this, And then I moved here, and the pandemic happened. So, like, I had a little bit of money left over from Nashville, and I just had my bandmates, so we just started recording all the time. And then I wasn't working because of the pandemic, so then I just started writing more and more and more, and then it just like something unlocked.
Yeah.
Like, it really, really unlocked, because like I can basically just write like anytime I want to, just sit down and write.
Yeah.
But I have a thing, like I made the thing now I just like alter it.
Yeah.
And I basically have the three primary, genres, so to speak, but like something new that's come in is like, for example, I'm releasing an album on the 22nd called Crestfallen Dusk, which is
22nd of July.
Yeah. It's called Crestfallen Dusk, and that is my first attempt at doing something with the blues, which I'd never touched. I just didn't. The world doesn't need another white guy playing the blues. But I love hill country blues.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and a friend of mine, or a college friend of mine, he was from Alabama, told me about that sound, that style. People like Junior Kimbrough specifically is the one I'm the most obsessed with. I always loved it, would listen to it, and but I wasn't ever going to do anything with it. But then, I don't know, somewhere in there, 2020, 2021, I don't know, I started thinking about it, and I was like, well, I got Primeval going, Primeval Well, which has the mountain music influence, and Stumptail has country music influence, and they each take different metal influences, and they each use different kinds of harmony and rhythmic things too. That's kind of how it ties in with the jazz thing. So I said, okay, let's see if I can do it with a blues sound. Like, what would it really sound like if you took hill country blues and mixed it with black metal? Like, what would that actually sound like? Where is the crossover? Like, so with Primeval Well, for example, it's really obvious. These old mountain tunes are so often in that what they call modal tuning or sawmill tuning or whatever. That's a given. Like, that like directly ties to McCoy Tyner's. Like, those banjo tunings are like practically McCoy Tyner piano voicings, which are oddly common in, again, those French black metal bands and things like Dark Throne or whatever, like Norwegian black metal stuff. Like, it's strange, man. But
Yeah.
So I said, okay, so where are the things with this hill country sound that I can cross over into black metal or avant-garde black metal or just avant-garde music in general or whatever? And so it's, spent a few months just sitting around thinking about it, and like, what would the guitar sound like? What would the instrumentation be? What would the lyrics be about? Because that's a whole other world. Like, blues lyrics are like another oddly specific subset of, blatant drug abuse, sexism, and all kinds of other fun things that, are arguably somewhat outside societal bounds. One thing that like I settled on, for example, is using all clean guitar tones for that. Like, it's basically all cleans. There's like no distortion, but there's distortion on the bass. There's distortion on the vocals, on the keys. In the master itself. To just try to create this
space,
distinctly menacing, extremely humid, basically trying to conjure up the hill country, which is in northeast Mississippi, which is ironically where the kid that plays drums on a lot of these things comes from, and make it true to people like Junior, you know, lyrically, conceptually. He died with like 35 kids. And the rawness, the like immediacy of his vibe with black metal without replicating any chord progressions or whatever that I had used in any of the other bands too. So I kind of had to come up with like a whole other framework of a palette, you know, a revised palette, so that it's not just the same. I don't want to repeat. There's like no point in creating a whole other thing if I'm just going to like borrow from the other bands, you know. It's stupid.
Yeah. Constant. That's the chat.
I don't want to self-cannibalize, really. Like I don't mind. Like I can splinter myself as many ways as I want to, and it's always going to come from the same mind. But I don't want to cheaply copy things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, that one's you know, that's like a new thing, like that I only started probably, I don't know, I wrote it probably a year ago. We started another thing called Skythala that's coming out later in the year, which is taking the same formula, ditching the American folk music, if you just want to call it that. Like I put all of this in the same umbrella, like I said, the three primary pillars, right? Ditch that one altogether and swap it out with Stravinsky just to see if we could pull it off. You know, which
has obviously his own rooting in European folk music,
in Russian specifically, and Russian paganism, and at least in that era of his work, of The Rite of Spring and Firebird and all that. So try to see how could that mix with black metal, and man, that was just like, that took a year. That's coming out in October on this Italian label called I Void Hanger, and I'm doing what am I doing? He's doing vinyl and CDs. I'm gonna release the tapes, but so like that one, for example, me and my keyboard guy Edward, who plays in like Spintria. Have you heard Spintria? Well, so we're both, you know, really obsessed with classical music. So he got Vienna Symphony. You familiar with that program?
I don't think so.
It's like, it's super heavy duty. It's basically what do you call it? It's like a live sample bank. I think, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
So it's you know, it's like what people use for movies and TV and stuff like that, film scoring and whatever. It's like the best that you can get currently. And I wrote an album's worth of riffs, got a guy, Sean Myers, to play drums on it, and then we got the drums back, and then we added in like oboes and bassoons and trombones, and it just like orchestrated all this stuff all through the whole album. It's totally nuts, you know. It's like totally insane, and I actually, like, I feel very strongly that was like an extremely successful musically. I don't know if anyone will ever buy it, but you know, taking the same kind of approach, but ditching the American stuff, just see if it still can still stand. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just as a challenge to myself. Plus, I love Stravinsky.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap this thing.
Okay.
Dude, this has been great.
Yeah, it's great talking with you.
Yeah. Remind people again. It's Moonlight Cypress Archetypes.
Yeah, the label is called Moonlight Cypress Archetypes. It was started in the pandemic with my drummer, who I still sometimes call Drum Kid, Zach Ormerod. He's no longer Drum Kid. He earned his name. He plays on Primeval and Stumptail and Vile Haint, Arcane Marrow. He's been very instrumental in helping me bring this stuff to life, partially by playing drums on the shit, but also because he has the home studio. and Edward, and we kind of just we started it. First release was last May, was Vile Haint.
Yeah.
But yeah, all this stuff can be heard at moonlightcypressarchetypes.bandcamp.com.
All right. Folks, you know where to find it. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I just want to do a shout out again to Raven Records and Rarities and Hutch and Howard Realty of Keller Williams. Thank you all for supporting this. I've had a lot of great guests on this show, but I can just say in terms of there's a lot about this conversation that I'm just very happy that we have documented. So I appreciate your time,
of course,
man. Appreciate your personhood. Thanks for being here. All right, folks.